All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right on time, 9 o'clock. Welcome to it's December. It's kind of stuck up on me. It's December, so our December Rail Transit Subcommittee. We in fact have not met since June 21st. It has been a long year of travel and it brought some time to go work on the rail plan and some other things. So today's meeting, asked Carol to give us an extra long slot on the agenda. So we have 2 hours, if we want to take 2 hours, but we're going to do a deep dive on rail plan. So with that, the first thing we need to do is to approve the June 21st meeting minutes. Motion by Mr. Foltz, second by Mr. Merrill. Sheriff Sheila, did you get that?
Say it one more time, please.
Motion by Mr. Foltz, seconded by Mr. Merrill.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so they're unanimously approved. Director's report. It feels like there's a lot to report since we were last together. I'm not going to go through the whole slide deck, but you guys will have you have a deck in your package. The same thing as the your seat in the boardroom. A couple of things that I do want to point out. We have December 1st, we opened our fiscal year 24 grant cycle. So that's for transit and rail. So that's open now for folks to apply for funding for what will be the 6-year program that will come to you in the spring.
How much water do you have?
That I don't know yet. We have our estimates, but we have estimates, preliminary estimates. The governor's budget comes out on Thursday.
So it'll be in the budget,
It'll be in the budget.
subject to legislative.
Right.
We had how much this year? Round numbers.
Round numbers, I think we had transit capital somewhere like 70 million. We had, this year was high. Remember 22 and 23, we had a significant uplift. 24, we're expecting, and we've told everybody will be less than what we've seen over the past. But that doesn't account for the revenue estimates that will come out of the governor's budget this next week. I'm getting a week ahead of myself. So I'm hoping that that's positive. We've prepared everybody, that we pushed all the COVID money through the program. So we're expecting things to come out a little bit after we've been higher than normal. So we'll bring you summaries of kind of what we're seeing in applications in March timeframe and draft program. On the ridership side, things are going very well. Nice to be able to report some strong statewide ridership trends. For transit, we saw over a 50% increase over the previous fiscal year. The first quarter of fiscal 23 has been even stronger. We've gone about another 25-30% on statewide transit ridership. So things are trending in the right direction. I would say Northern Virginia continues to lag behind the rest of the state, primarily because the federal workforce is not back in any kind of across the board fashion. So that impacts WMATA, but also impacts the local transit here as well.
So is that the reason potentially for the drop off in September tourists?
Yeah. For WMATA, they do definitely got a lot of tourism bump in the summer. It's interesting when you talk to their GM that the ridership patterns and trends that they see are very different than what we saw pre-COVID, where you had a very peak hour commuter focused system. Now on Fridays, you have almost nobody in the morning peak hour, but then you have this huge rush of folks that are ready to go out and experience DC on a Friday afternoon. So their patterns are changing. They're making adjustments to how they provide service to help meet those different patterns, running less trains on the Friday morning, more trains on the Friday afternoon. I think that's just what we need to continue to work through with all of our systems, is figure out how do you adapt to a different travel pattern that we've learned and started in the past. You do that not on the fly so much.
So on a very positive note, seeing a lot of the new cars back on the track, the big car train sets.
So nice.
Well, just in general, yeah. It's nice to see those kind of work. The yard is fully operational at New Dulles Airport. Also very positive.
I was in Northern Virginia Sunday night and yesterday morning, and headline on the news was increased frequency on the red line. So more service, helping to meet the demand, keep the crowding down now that they've got 7,000 coming back into the system.
And then the other, I think, interesting thing of note is Metro stopped using their automation system in 2009, not because of a problem with the automation system, but because of an accident that occurred. And now, so 13 years later, they're about to reinitiate automated service. The system was designed back in the 60s to be automated.
It's automated.
So it's manually, since 2009, every Metro train is manually operated.
Right.
Acceleration, deceleration, and braking
Right, perfect.
by a person. So now the person will still be there, but I think that's a big move forward as well. It should keep the system more fluid. And it's amazing it's taken 13 years, but I'm assuming Randy Clark said, I want that done. So
Randy is very dynamic and has made a huge impact on Metro in a very short period of time.
That's good.
And talked to him yesterday, and I'm hoping that we'll have him address the level for some point in time next year, just because I think you will, hearing where he comes with a safety background, he's got experience in businesses around the country. We'll hear things that will help bolster your confidence in where they are and where they're going. Fine. Yeah, we'll hear that first. Yes.
I should say we had a very
We had a great time.
robust meeting after that, spent over 2 hours together going through the things. I think it'll help all of us, it's all about the information that we have and the ability to make a decision confidently or to approve something confidently. That's what we're working on.
And that annual certification is tied to the dedicated capital funding that passed in 2018. So we're coming up on 5 years of that dedicated capital funding. And so what we're going to do in partnership with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and Mr. Casper at some times, and that conversation is as part of sharing the certification part with you. We're going to give you a 5-year look back as part of that presentation and tell you what's happened because of that investment. And the first investment that came out of that dedicated capital funding happened in Virginia, with the blue and yellow platform improvement program, which was painful to work through, but I mean, made huge impacts from a state of repair perspective. We've got the yellow line bridge and tunnel work that's underway. We've had the orange line station platform improvement program. So we've seen great benefits from a capital state of repair perspective as a result of those investments. And I think that's part of the story. We need to do a better job.
Right. So quantify that, qualify it. It's going to be really the key.
Jennifer, help me here. Virginia agencies, does that include VRE?
That doesn't.
Does it include municipal transit systems?
Yes.
So it's not just state agencies, it's also local government.
That's all of our transit systems. We have 40 that operate in Commonwealth, excluding WMATA. So we break out WMATA separately, but everybody else, including
So
VRE, is in
anybody
that
who
WMATA.
gets on a bus, be it Virginia Breeze or local system.
Not Virginia Breeze. This is all local transit. This is local transit. I'm going to show you Virginia Breeze separately because
Okay.
that's
This
intercity
is local transit and VRE.
and VRE.
Would it be possible, without changing 12 months, look at this year, just to get a year of comparison?
There you go. Next slide. Thank you, Andy. Next slide, you get the year over year from 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, looking at the month of September. Thank you. So again, we're trending in the right direction. Continuing to work with our local transit agencies. We've got plans for 2023 to pick up with, we did a rediscovery garage campaign this year to kind of get people reacclimated to using local transit to get work or to get where they need to go. We'll pick that up again, a slightly different messaging campaign in 2023, but we saw a great response to that. And so we're going to continue to help our.
Great, that's great, thank you. A lot of money have actually worked. Is there,
47%.
is there a projection about how many million riders it will take Everything, but economics are based upon million riders.
So,
It stays at 4 million, how much more subsidy required to get to 5 million?
so that's all calculated as part of WMATA's annual budget process. They make an estimate, they estimate ridership and revenue, fare-based revenue as part of their budget. So they're not budgeting based on a 2019 level of ridership. They're budgeting based on a fraction thereof. And so their ridership trends have, if I remember correctly, have been pretty close to their budget over the past year. They're going to start rolling out their budget this month for fiscal 24. There is some discussion as part of that budget where the District of Columbia for the bus system, which their ridership on the bus system is 75% of pre-pandemic. The bus ridership has come back much stronger than the rail at this point. There is some conversation where DC wants to go zero fare for the bus system. That would be done by DC paying an additional subsidy and would not impact the economy. And that's something that we've had some questions about. That if that were to move forward, it would be done through the budget and that would have to be picked up by the district. We would have to pick it up. But that is part of how they calculate what their funding needs are and what their gap will be on the operating side.
Yeah, the VRE is back to what, approximately what percent of pre-pandemic?
They are, Andy's pointing, 23% in September.
So they're the real lack.
Struggling.
They are.
Almost exclusively federal employees.
And why is the federal government not back to work?
If she could answer that, yeah, she'd be the.
I asked myself,
Editorial.
Call the White House.
if it makes you feel any better, I was in Northern Virginia yesterday, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and Rappahannock Transportation Commission legislative forum, and I was not the only person that brought that up.
Good.
So that is a growing point of discussion because every agency, every federal agency kind of has a different perspective and a different philosophy right now in terms of how they're returning to the office. And that makes commuting patterns very inconsistent. And so it's hard for transit systems to plan. If they knew that the federal workforce was going to be in the office maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever it is, that they could plan their levels of service around a consistent schedule. What we're seeing, and this, I will credit this to Bob Schneider of OmniRide. And one of the things that they're seeing is they're seeing folks go back to the office. They're not going back to get into the office at 8 a.m. and stay till 5 p.m. They're working from home for part of the day. They're going in mid-morning. They're going in mid-morning. They're doing, things in the office and they're coming home. So when you have commuter systems like VRE, where they're set up to carry somebody into the district to be at their office at 8 a.m. and bring them back at the end of the workday, one midday train, it's harder for folks, it's harder for them to adapt because that service isn't set up that way. We're seeing systems like OmniRide that run commuter bus changing how they provide that service to provide less frequent service in the peak period and spread that out over the course of the day so they can capture some of those trips where somebody might go in at 10 and come back at 3. The problem is most of those folks that are making those off-peak trips are choosing to do it in a car. And so how we continue to adapt as an industry is going to be critical, but that's part of why it's so hard for VRE. It is the federal workforce, but it is also this hybrid dynamic where people are traveling in hours that don't align with train schedules and are looking for more flexibility when they are afforded more flexibility than they have. So that's harder for our system, particularly for the rail system to adapt.
Nationally, I'm assuming this is the trend, not just here, but the federal government being the majority of the riders. But what are the trends with the other, like SEPTA in Philadelphia? Are they returning to their normal levels?
I would say state, when you look at us statewide, pull DC out, we're about at the national average, maybe doing a little bit better because we have systems like Richmond that are doing extraordinarily well.
How about just VRE?
VRE, I think they're on the commuter rail nationally is all right. But I think because they're serving DC, I would rather look at like Mark as a comparator with Maryland and see what their ridership is like.
But they're also very much a federal workforce.
They're also, so commuter rail is down.
So,
Because on the private sector, my daughter works for White, like, they're still working remotely because,
Yeah.
somebody that's federal.
Yeah. and that dynamic's changed and will never return fully, in my opinion, but it's hard to say what the new is.
Andy, if we can go on to the next one. I think we've got, so Dr. Smith, you mentioned Virginia Breeze.
Story.
This is my happy place. This is a happy story. So we celebrated our 5-year anniversary of Virginia Breeze service. We launched December 1st of 2017 in one route. October was our highest ridership month ever. And we've seen growing ridership on all 4 routes that connect Western and Central Virginia to Washington. This system is doing fantastic. It's really becoming a national model for how you can do state-supported intercity bus service. We are very nimble. We DRPT manage the system very actively. I have a program manager that takes care of this, looks at ridership, looks at ticket sales, makes changes on the fly, and more buses on days when we have higher demand. So Virginia Breeze is continuing to exceed it.
This is all fair.
So this is fair and federal funding. There is no state money in this.
Jennifer, as with many of the things we look at, it's always challenging to look at it and go, oh, that's great, the total ridership, because it's hard to assess what the capacity of the system is. I think, and that may help on others, it's more complex, but it'd be really easy to show what our capacity is and what our ridership is. So we have a clear understanding of if we could increase 30% or 20 or 50%. It's very much like office space. You have your vacancy rate. That capacity issue will really help us understand where we're going. And if we start to narrow that down, we have some sort of additional capacity on these routes, it also starts to read that into what we narrow it.
And I think one of the things that I will say we did not consider right out of the box with Virginia Breeze is the ability with a very good contractor that operates this for us. When we start to see that bus get full with ticket sales, we just call them and we add another one.
See, that's great.
We've run as many as 12 buses in one direction on one day on the Valley Flyer.
That's
Meet demand.
remarkable.
So when you think about it, like Blacksburg, Northern Virginia, 55 passenger bus, we get to a certain point with ticket sales, we'll add one.
See, being able to add dynamic, it's just
It's, yes, and we've had a great relationship with our contractor. We added the Highlands Rhythm November 1st of last year, which is Bristol to DC. It hits the most popular spots on the Valley Flyer. So now we do a little bit of, if Valley Flyer is getting close to selling out, we try to push folks over to the Highlands Rhythm, which runs a little bit later in the day to balance that out, since we have the 2 frequencies on the 81 corridor. But that's, I mean, start thinking about it in terms of, even if it's 10 buses, I gotta have simple math, 55 people on a bus, 10 buses, that's 500 cars that are on I-81.
so.
What do we
Fred, you
know
can
about
ask-
these riders are,
We did a survey of ridership prior to the pandemic. And so at that point, we just had the Valley Flyers. We just had the one route. We do get a lot of students in the I-81 corridor from Virginia Tech and JMU, but we also were quite surprised that we have business travelers, we have leisure travelers. It is not just a student-driven service. We see peaks around special events in the corridor, things like football games. But it's done really well. We're due to revisit that rider survey at some point, and maybe as soon as year, especially now that we have 4 routes instead of 1. So I was concerned early on that it was more of a student thing, but I was pleasantly surprised.
how much is the ticket save from Bristol to DC?
Bristol to DC is $60
One way?
one way. And it's a distance fare, so it goes down. I think that the lowest price ticket is about $20, $25 and the highest.
It makes no stops in one way.
No, it does make stops now.
So in assessing a program like this, do you ever look at cost per passenger mile?
We do. We look at cost per passenger, cost per mile. We look at all of those factors. we do a really detailed report once. We do the analysis once a month, I think, publish once a quarter, that includes all of it.
Could you just include cost per passenger mile on these updates as well? And do you do that for all transit or some select subgroup?
So the cost per mile, cost per passenger, that's all part of our funding formula for all the local transit systems. So it's baked into the performance-based operating formula for the local transit. So we have that data for everybody. We publish it as well. So we have everything we need.
Do we have that for WMATA as well?
We do not, but the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission at their meeting last Thursday night, they've got a transit data dashboard that they'll be rolling out later this month. They've built that dashboard based on data that's coming out of our open data portal, but they have been negotiating with WMATA to get the vehicle miles traveled, vehicle revenue hours that we haven't had access to before. So once NVTC obtains that for their dashboard, we're going to back in hours. So we will be able to do that.
So the information is available, it's not on our portal.
Not,
The cost per passenger mile.
I would have to check, but we can put it
I'll
on.
check in with you afterwards, I'd like to see that statewide. So VRE would be included in that as well. See, that's going to be, I think, a great indicator.
Rail per mile is more expensive than bus.
Sure.
Yeah.
This model, since it works so well, is there any plans to expand it to other areas of the state?
So we did a study looking at a fifth route, looking at connecting Hampton Road. So the federal money that we use to pay for this has some strict parameters around,
Springs attached?
yes, around how it can be used. And so it is intended for rural connections, places where there's not intercity bus service. So we have to make sure we have meaningful rural stops. So we stop in Winfield, we stop in Bradford, we stop in Lexington. We've got different places that meet the federal criteria for rural that we stop, because that's part of why we do this. We did do a study looking at a fifth route that would connect Hampton Roads to DC, but would do that going up through, like up 17, up through, Saluda to Tappahannock to Fredericksburg and on to DC. And I mean, it's very rural, and the productivity wasn't where we really wanted to be. And I think we're in a good spot with this program. I never want to come to you and say, I don't have enough money to do this. Right. And so we're very deliberate in how we manage the federal funds that pay for this. And I think the best thing for us to do right now is settle into phase 4 and continue to look at some other options. I do want to go back and correct one thing, that we did get a little bit of money out of the I-81 corridor for the Highlands Rhythm. It's less than about $1 million over 3 years to help with some operating and to do a few bus stop improvements in the corridor. But that is the only state money that we've had going to this program, and it will continue to be a federally funded and fare-based program. On the track.
I think flexibility of having to add new buses or reduce your fleet is a big advantage.
I mean, it's really a public-private partnership. It's, it is contracted but actively managed by the public. And
Attention is really important.
Sandy, you want to go on to the next one? I'll touch on. Yeah, so I want to touch on Amtrak ridership as well. Amtrak ridership continues to beat expectations. We had all-time high record ridership Amtrak Virginia in the month of August. September dipped down. That is typical when you come out of the summer. September dipped down, but it still was the highest September ridership on record for Amtrak Virginia. 105,000 passengers compared to
Statistics, yeah.
compared to 76,000 passengers in September of 2019.
Right,
So,
we added to it in October.
So it's Amtrak, yes, you did. Amtrak ridership's doing fantastic. Since we last met, we've launched the second train to Roanoke, the third train to Norfolk, and we brought back a train to Newport News that had been suspended due to the pandemic. And so all of those are doing quite well.
Yeah, I'd like to actually thank Mike for sitting in the
It's
back.
like in back end.
Yeah, for organizing what was just an incredibly informative trip. For those of us who were able to attend, see that right away, both the CSX and the NS, and be part of that was incredibly beneficial to the board. Thank you.
Thanks for attending, thanks for directing.
Sheriff, tell us about the Richmond ridership. What trains, is that one or two trains?
Like
That's one, but keep in mind that the Norfolk train, that's one train round trip to Richmond, but keep in mind the Norfolk train and Newport News train come through Richmond, as well as the Carolinian trains and all the long distance trains.
So this is a purely Richmond to DC.
Yes, and it goes down the Northeast Corridor as well.
It goes on up.
Yes, it goes up the Northeast Corridor as well.
So last couple of good news items I want to mention, and then we'll get on into the rail plan. We had three big events over the last month. Casper was already mentioned. We had celebrated the opening of the Silver Line, and I think I told somebody that day that a wonderful celebration of a ribbon cutting can soothe a lot of wounds. We're getting a big project.
It really is amazing the way things are forgotten very quickly.
Very quickly. But we had a great day with the folks from Metro and the local leaders, and there's no denying the economic benefits of that Silver Line. You just have to go out that corridor and see all of the development underway. People want to live near those stations, people want to work near those stations, and their ridership right out of the gate.
Where is the Silver Line?
So it picks up in Reston and goes 6 stations west to Ashburn.
Well, actually, it starts in Tyson.
It starts in Tyson, but I'm sorry, this phase opens up from Reston to Ashburn.
Belvis and out, it splits and goes to Eastburg.
It's
And the development is
the
unbelievable.
economic engine of Northern Virginia, there's no question.
And all the commercial and businesses.
The buildings on Toll Road are 100% occupied. Buildings 2 miles away are 50, 40, 30%. It's just stark the differences.
It's amazing.
There was a really interesting piece done by the Washington Post right after it opened, where they had two teams start
That
from
was
central DC, one in a car and one on Metro to see who could get to the airport first. And then compare the difference in cost as well. And so I think the folks that go on the Metro won by 1 minute, but they did it for, $6 in comparison to what costs significantly more to drive and to.
Cars off the road, less
Well,
stress.
it really is big, but I will tell you, just to give you something to anticipate, when we have our Northern Virginia board meeting next year, we will be focusing on Metro and taking a tour Metro by riding cars and seeing the Silver Line in particular.
So Dulles is the end of the line.
No,
No,
it goes
that's not
two stations past Dulles to Ashburn.
Where?
In Leesburg.
Well, Leesburg doesn't go all the way. It goes to 2 stops in Ashburn and
Loudon Gateway.
Loudon Gateway. And
Okay.
Loudon Gateway, I know the developer there. They're pretty just.
And is there any consideration at this time of extending farther into Loudon? Okay, so that is the end of the line until somebody comes along and decides.
I would say in our working lifetimes and beyond, yes.
Yeah, okay. That's all I do.
Jack Potter was the chief executive of WMATA at the end of this project, and they did a very extensive interview. Jennifer, you probably read it. And they had a really difficult time. It was something that was decided well before he became the main guy there. And the reporter asked him a series of questions, and the last question was, well, Mr. Potter, looking back on your experience managing this major transit project, is there anything you do differently? He said, well, there's one thing. I've chosen not to do it. And so I don't think you're going to see anybody volunteering to even suggest an extension of this.
It was interesting at the ribbon cutting, how many people spoke about how long that concept had been in development. And it had been in development way longer than I realized. And I mean,
Back to the 90s.
no, it went back even further than that. It had been on paper for over. So like to take a long time for something to come to fruition, especially with the airport. So that's definitely been something to celebrate. Hampton Roads Transit had a ribbon cutting on Friday for their base express. So at the naval station, there little access and little mobility around the base. You could get to the base, but you couldn't figure out how to get around once you were there. So this is something that we funded through the trip program. We'll give them an opportunity to see how having circulation within and just off the base will help bolster transit ridership in partnership. So that happened Friday, and then back in November, we did a ribbon cutting with the governor for the Petersburg multimodal facility, the parking deck. That was a project funded in round one of Smart Scale. And round one, and it is now complete and open to the public. And that was, in addition to a multimodal facility that had opened back in 2007. So we've had a lot to celebrate as we kind of bring the year to a close. Lots to look forward to. That.
One last question on Metro. And one of the things that we did in our visionary work was to try to maintain in the 66 project right away to allow further extension from the orange line. Is there any even discussion of that being a viable project? So not even on the radar?
Not even on the radar. You may recall we had a legislatively mandated study to look at an extension of the blue line south from Springfield to Quantico.
Those are huge dollars.
Huge dollars. You guys all looked at me with shocked faces when I said those huge dollars. I think that was last year. Really the next big capacity thing with Metro is going to be to address the Round One tunnel. Because there's not much more you can push through the orange or silver through into Virginia without addressing capacity of the Round One tunnel. They're going to do some optimization. Randy Clark said yesterday they're working on some optimization that will basically get us right at capacity.
Automation will help.
Automation will help on that, but that'll be a 2023 effort to maximize that, and then we're trying to build something happen.
What's the approximate cost of the rest of the last estimate?
I can't recall. It's
Multiple billions.
yes, it's a very large number, and then it's how do you link that into the system, because it's not just talking about the tunnel, but it's how does that tie into the processing station or
Metro Center and all that.
yes. So, yes.
Yeah.
Just use the orange sheet.
Yeah, what a great use for it. I can see that right developing.
Back it up, ship it up, down the river.
So Metro, they've been working on a blue orange silver capacity study that it has been a little bit in a holding pattern. So I expect that they will try to finalize that with a preferred alternative in 2023. They are also working on their strategic plan, and so recall in October, that was one of the things that we gave them some very specific feedback, like their strategic planning efforts needed to be much better than what we received 4 or 5 years ago. They have responded very positively to that. And so I think that will also weigh into kind of some of the big picture, long range, preparing for any kind of big projects, but they're very much focused on taking care of what they have.
As they should be. Exactly.
All right, so the rest of our meeting is focused on our statewide rail plan.
Good update.
We had a good discussion with you all back in May and June about the rail plan. Really took that to heart. We have a great passenger rail program being implemented by the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority because we've had a very visionary and strategic statewide rail plan in the past that got us there. And so we need to do the same thing on the freight side, recognizing that there's a lot still up in the air. There's things like the inland port study that's almost done that ultimately will weigh into this. My goal with the rail plan is for this not to be a static document that we only look at every 4 or 5 years, but really to have a living document, a vision that we can continue to grow and modify and adapt as the opportunities present themselves, so we can be much more nimble. We have a strong partnership with the Economic Development Partnership with the port. It takes working with those folks to be able, and all of our railroad partners to be able to do those, make those big strategic changes on the freight side as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily and have her walk you through where we are with the rail plan, and where we go from here.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So you have heard about the rail plan before, but will be a lot more comprehensive this time, and we're getting closer to the finish line, which is exciting. We will talk about the purpose of the rail plan, go through some top 10 highlights since the last rail plan came through, talk about nationwide rail trends and how Virginia has emerged as an industry leader, talk about lessons learned and what we've heard through our public involvement efforts, and some of the goals and policies, really policy framework document that is coming out of this rail plan. And we'll dig into the freight and passenger projects that are listed in the rail plan, our project benefits, and then just some nuts and bolts on how to use the plan. And we have until, on the books, we have until 10:30, but I think we have a little extra time if we need it too, right? Yep. So.
That last slide.
Yes, sir.
Will that picture actually be used in our presentation of the rail plan?
Should it be used
No,
in our
will it,
presentation?
are we looking at something that will be part of what ultimately is?
Yes.
Okay.
So the executive summary really follows this agenda that we have today. As you all probably are aware, if you've ever looked at a statewide rail plan before, FRA has very detailed guidelines on how they want the rail plan to look. But we've tried to make the rail plan a little more user-friendly and mold it to the questions that you all were asking. So we have the executive summary set up this way, and then the rest of the rail plan is set up according to the FRA guidelines.
My only comment is I don't really see anything. I see highway, and we know the station, but for somebody looking at that, it doesn't, I don't see track.
You are right.
It's not, yeah, and unless you know the station, I don't think you'd even know that there was a track joining it, so.
You're absolutely right.
Something a little bit more rail and action oriented.
Right. That's a good comment. And we will have, we're getting our picture, well, Andy has been going through our archives of photographs, and we're actually putting together a new rail map right now. So, you all, we have rail maps for you guys. And actually, I'm speaking out of turn here. I should get an update before I start talking about it. But yeah, we've got some really cool pictures coming. So the purpose and update, you've heard a lot of this before. We align with our goals and objectives with VTrans, our statewide long-range plan. Our last rail plan was adopted in 2018. We do this every 4 years in order to qualify for federal funding and for lots of other reasons too. We include a 6-year and 20-year horizon, so short-term and long-term projects. And the goal for FRA is really to be able to compare data points and metrics plan to plan and state to state. And we do have very close coordination with VPRA as well. And of course, you may be asking, so what, DRPT does retain its responsibility for statewide rail planning, and we work together with VPRA on this long-range plan. So some highlights since the last rail plan. We have added, and this is just as a result of our programs at DRPT. So as a result of the grant programs that we have, we've added 21 sidings since the last rail plan. 2,500 rail miles have been improved. 13 million rail carloads generated as a result of our programs, and 44 million trucks converted as a result of our programs.
That's incremental.
That is since the last rail plan.
Since the last rail plan. So that's a great slide. And I actually think having run the rail plan is probably the most important slide in the deck from a perspective of what we're looking at and interested in. But as with many things that we talked about today, having context on it would be just incredibly helpful. So to Mark's question, is it incremental? It's incremental since our last rail plan. But the challenge I have on things like we've added 21 sidings in a universe of and how many may have been lost in that time. I think part of this is there's good news here, but we want to tell the whole story. And it's really important that if that's a number, it's very much like our discussions about Metro. We just want the information that helps us understand, are we making progress? Are we static, or are we losing ground? And I can't tell from that slide.
Right.
So in the final iteration of this, we have a way of looking at this and giving a comparative metric on system-wide totals in those same areas. It'd be really helpful to us. And of course, what we're about is making sure that the money we're spending is leading to a robust and thriving rail system. And that's the part that I'd like to get, a bit more disclosive in the slides or in the tables that follow.
Because that's my question, incremental, have we added 13 million rail cars on top of the base number, or is that now? So,
Again, yeah.
44 million trucks.
Are those totals, Emily, or is that in
Those
addition
are-
to whatever it was?
It should be in addition to, but because it's private industry, it's possible that somewhere else in the network, things could have gone down. But this is, we have to have, grant agreements with commitments for rail cars for each one of our programs. And so as we look at the grants that have gone through in the past 4 years, these are the commitments for new rail cars, for new, trucks diverted that we've captured from those applications and that have been commitments. But yes, I mean, it is possible that throughout the industry, things could have shifted up and down in other areas. And
So
one thing.
Context is important.
Right.
All of that.
Right. One thing I do want to point out is, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we go, we have, since the last rail plan, also digitized all of the rail infrastructure in Virginia into GIS. We have put all of our current projects that are in the 6-year improvement program into GIS. We've digitized that, and we're going to go through that with Bridget in a few minutes. We're in the process now of also putting all of our past projects in as well, so that we can track that a little bit better geographically. So I think that will help.
Okay, so that's an important project, and that's occurred since we last spoke, I guess, or it was underway.
It was underway.
Okay,
Mhm.
so that should give us the information source perhaps to identify active sightings.
Great.
Okay, so that would be really helpful to look at that. I know we won't have that historically, but if we have a starting point out of a total of 1,800 active sightings, we added 21, or maybe the number is 970. But what we're all about is originating traffic. You can't originate traffic if you don't have, or terminating traffic. You can't do either of those if we don't have more sightings.
Well, and I think that goes back to my comment at the beginning about having a living document. We are not producing a hard copy bound notebook that we're going to stick on a shelf. What we're going to have is an interactive plan. And so we're going to be able to keep that data up to date, and we'll be able to see trends and changes over time in a way that we've never done before. And so in line with our open data portal and everything else, it is transparent to the extent, like Emily said, we're dealing with private companies and don't always want to share information, but to the extent we can, we're going to have that information available.
And of course, freight tonnage has gone down due to the decreasing coal shipments. Those coal shipments are pretty heavy, so you see that coming out in the data here. Due to our GIS digitization effort, we're now able to dig a little deeper on the number of tracks and the actual infrastructure that's out there. So in the past, we've always reported that the route miles remain constant at around 3,000 route miles in Virginia for railroad tracks. Now we can actually say track miles. And so we're digging a little deeper there. So don't be alarmed by the fact that it's gone up from 3,000 to almost 6,000. It's because we're actually counting. If there's double track, it ends up in that number. Yes.
I'm in the coal industry, so to speak, and coal historically, over as long as I've been in the business, has been up and down. It goes through cycles. Wouldn't it be good to have coal as a line separate to give, as Scott says, perspective to gauge against general cargo rather than coal specific? I mean, coal right now is starting to climb again. Metallurgy is holding strong, and But, you know, coal is very elastic.
So,
Sure, and that is, we do have that in the rail plan, but it's, but I just don't have it for this presentation. So, but that's a good point.
Yeah, that way you can see if general cargo is increasing or holding its own. And it's to have coal mixed in is kind of, excuse it.
right, it's hard to know what to,
Yeah.
you know. So, you know, and when we talked about this before too, that categorization of various commodities that are shipped by rail, Wall Street Journal reports on every week. Now, I mean, obviously, it would benefit us if we had something that was in line with their reporting metrics. Because if you look at coal, they look at grain, they look at whatever the metrics are, they've been doing it for 100 years. And if our 2022 number was broken down into those categories, it'll help us again identify what the trends are.
And we do have those numbers, and I can talk with you about we can drill down into those. I'm happy to do it. And they, of course, this all points to an opportunity for multimodal, intermodal shipments. And so that's kind of where rail is focused, of course, is just in time deliveries. This is a real highlight of the overall trends, but those are things that we will definitely be highlighting in the rail plan.
Yeah, and I think a good way to, I guess, critically review this is as we look at this, it should tell a story, and it's a dynamic one, as Jennifer said. If we get to a point that we have more questions based on that, then part of the initial presentation should be at least a high-level determination of, well, what changed that lowered traffic between the last rail plan and this. So there's, I think, some pretty obvious ones with the effort.
Emily, to go back a minute to the preview. 2 or 3 thoughts. One is wherever you use the phrase last Virginia rail plan, I should just put it a date. We can give a door prize here this morning for who knows the date of the last Virginia rail plan.
It's 2018, 4 years ago, yeah.
But what was it, 2018 or something, I think.
Yes.
But nobody knows.
It's all right. It's 2018 to 2022. So we're reporting the four years.
Yeah, but we'll put that in where you talk about it. And second thing, abandoned rail miles, 97. First question, does that compare with the 3,000 number or the 5927 number?
Route miles are track miles.
Yeah, route miles or track miles.
That'd be critically important.
As far as I know, it's route miles.
Yeah, because my guess is, just anecdotally thinking about this, can't come up with 97 miles of abandoned rail in the last 4 years. Now, the Eastern Shore Railroad, is 50-some miles, so I assume that's the lion's share of it. But where else is that happening?
So it's happening in small.
We should know
Smaller
that actually.
chunks.
It'd be really easy to have.
And we have a map of that as well that we could pull
Yeah,
up.
that'd be,
And maybe that's something we can look at when you do the demo.
I was going to add, we do have the interactive, we can actually filter by area and see exactly where these mileages are. And the same with the commodities you were talking about as well. We have that whole breakdown in a dashboard, so you can quickly see those numbers that you were asking for.
I'd also suggest that we should be consistent, and actually route miles are more of a universal indicator of the health of the system than track miles. So it'd be interesting to note that at some point, but route miles are really what matters. Are we connecting point to point? So I would track that as a primary metric, as well as abandoned rail should be route miles rather than track miles.
It's a track mile versus route mile.
So where we have double track or triple track, or I'm not sure if they're including yard facilities. Does that include yard facilities and terminal facilities in track miles?
It does, yes.
It does. So that's confusing as well.
We have the categories. It'll say, this is the mileage, but then it's mainline, spurs, yards, et cetera.
Yeah, somewhere down in the appendix to this, that could be useful information, but I think we'll want to know at a high level, are we maintaining our track? I'm sorry, we're maintaining our route miles.
And some of our strategy here is also to, as we work with railroads, is to increase freight fluidity that will rise all boats that will help with both passenger rail and freight rail. And sometimes that means really maximizing the use and efficiency of those route miles rather than track miles. So if those connections that are well used, that sometimes have bottlenecks, are optimized with double track, or in some cases triple track or additional sidings, that can be a really good bang for the buck in our investments. So anyway, that's just something to think about too. All right, but definitely showing the differences is important. I'm just going to go really fast through these because again, these are highlights. These are things you can dig into when you get into the rail plan, and we can also look at in more detail when Bridget shows us some of the GIS. So rail miles owned in Virginia, this is huge. We actually own rail miles in Virginia now. And we're there. Some of that is in terms of right of way. Some of that is in terms of existing rail miles. We are also going after federal grant applications with more frequency since 2018, and we've gotten some awards of over 176 million. We've applied for quite a few, and we have quite a few pending as well. And then the total planned investment in our program in the 2018 statewide rail plan, we had almost $4 billion. In 2022, we're looking at $6.6 billion. So a lot of changes since 2018. I'm going to turn.
Is that government and customer?
So this is total planned investment. So that's both government and private sector. If there are grants that we have, this includes the match as well.
Okay, but now, if Norfolk, just to make up an example, if Norfolk Southern decides to spend $300 million to approve something, it has no state funding, no federal funding, it's pure Norfolk Southern capital. Is that included?
It's not necessarily included. If they've reported it to us, then we include everything that we hear about. But in general, these are projects that we have a partnership with.
So it's wrong for us to perceive this to reflect just what the state is doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Oh, there you are.
Now I moved to the controls. Okay.
So Bree's going to show us how we can dig down into this rail plan a little bit more and hopefully answer some of the questions that you all have. So I'm going to turn things over to you, Bridget.
Sure.
And this is Bridget Wagner from HDR, and she's our GIS lead on the rail plan.
All right, thank you. So this is just one, this is really the initial application that we're showing in the rail plan. So as you're scrolling through that document online with the text, this is what you'll come to in chapter 2, which is really that initial chapter that's really showing, existing conditions, the state of rail as it currently stands. So this application, when you first see it, when you see this map in the text area, you'll see, well, I'd say first and foremost on the far right-hand side that there is a user guide. We know this whole rail plan being interactive is new, and we want to make sure that everyone can use it to the best of their abilities and really get the most out of it. So just quickly, that there are these instructions for how you can see the data, filter it, and really get that context of those numbers that that we've been discussing. So back to this. So in the main map here, you can actually pan around and zoom. You can even go in so far at a very granular scale and start to see that breakdown of rail types. So the chart and that number, they're going to interactively change, right, as you pan around the map. So this would be more, I think, of a leisurely review if you're just panning around the map itself, just to see what that information is. So here's where you're seeing, what we talked about. We can go to the abandoned app, but the abandoned types of rail and the ways we have them categorized, which would again add context for all of that mileage. So you're seeing, what are the categories that we have from that digitization effort. We also have this table that you could scroll through of all the individual rail segments, but most importantly for this are these filters. And that's what I think what a lot of this discussion has been. So, we could go back to that main view of the map, and here's where we could filter, just by abandoned and try to start to see. So we're actually showing 85.9. and those are the very exact GIS calculations, of these rail segments. So that's where you kind of start to see where those are exactly. And this is just, again, in that overall. Additionally, you could filter by the owner, and then operator, locality, VDOT district, or even trying to, filter down by that state-supported route. So some of those earlier metrics that were shown. You could apply one or many filters. And again, that's really just different ways to get to the same kind of data we're showing overall. So this is really the same thing here. If you clicked on rail type, you could filter just for yards by clicking on the chart here, and it will isolate all the yards. If you get in there, you can even change the base map to aerial if you really want to look at what those existing conditions are looking like. Google Maps, like boots on the ground, you can see this in the desktop. So it can be really powerful, helpful to quickly, spot a location and then, be able to make those assessments. Was there anything you wanted to add on this one before I hop to the other
That's a
one?
great tool.
Thank you.
And again, it's wonderful, and the nerds in the room will go look at this. I put myself in that category.
Mhm.
Again, what really benefits us is trend analysis. Tell us what's changed, and so those are the metrics that I think we should present the report
Right.
with the opportunity to go and drill into that if we so choose.
And I think going backward is actually, we can do some of that a little bit better when we look back. For this rail plan, we're really looking forward. And so, but when we talk about kind of our freight impact, also, I think that looking back can help.
And that's a huge benefit, I would also say, with this. This is just the start. So we can do that temporal thing that you're showing, right, that you're talking about, right, where we can say we've digitized everything now, then we can always work backwards to show, right, that this data just keeps growing.
Give us a definition of abandoned.
It's complicated because there is the legal definition when the railroad actually files an abandonment with the SEC, and we keep track of those, and that is part of what's reported here. But then there's also underused, disused. There are lots of different categories, and I could do a whole presentation on that. But that's the abandoned is that final step.
Well, does it mean that it's still owned by the railroad, but it's no longer used? The
Right.
track may or may not be taken up.
Right.
So looking at this from a rails to trails perspective, abandoned to me gives us an indication of what might be out there that is a candidate for rails to trails.
It's possible. But that we understand there's a lot of interest in that, and that's why we want to make sure that we're getting the information out
But
there.
it could be abandoned, but the railroad thinks, well, maybe in 20 years from now, we may want it.
It's all a negotiation.
So if it's abandoned, it means it's gone all the way through the process with the Surface Transportation Board
Yes.
and it's done. To your point, that, I mean, it's no longer,
It's usually, it can still be owned by the railroad.
but it's been taken off of the,
Not insurance.
Right.
but you have a different classification for out of service. So,
Right.
so there, Dr. Sweet, to your point, there could be corridors that are out of service where the rail company's made a decision that they're not going to maintain it, they're not going to have it available for operations, but they haven't gone through that step with the Surface Transportation.
They might
So it is dotted.
decide at some future time
Correct.
to start using it.
Or to abandon it. So there's a little bit of a, I just want to make sure that
It's in limbo.
there's a limbo state out there.
Yes.
Right here or over here?
Yes, line for decades.
It was not abandoned, it's out of service.
So they had done, so that.
Yeah.
Thing is, you showed us a dotted.
That's
We
why
throw that term around a lot, but
I
Oh,
just
yeah,
wanted
but
to
here.
make sure everybody understood that that's the most final of the decisions, but there's also
Could
out
not
of
be a
service.
solid.
That's fine, it's not on here.
For real, true.
as abandoned.
Is that a solid?
Yes.
Just to be consistent.
Oh, I think we did that just because.
And then we do have also on
We can adjust.
the crossings, but I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that one. So we did when we found out that FRA was going to roll out a crossings program for the first time, a crossing improvement program, we went ahead and digitized all of these, or took the FRA's crossings layer from their website and enhanced it. And actually did a study of all of the crossings in Virginia so that we could prioritize what to apply for with this FRA program. So you all can dig into this if you'd like. I'm gonna skip through it though. We'll talk a little bit more about the crossings program in a minute.
Okay.
So we can move on to the next slide.
By the way, rail crossings are at grade.
Yes, at grade
At grade.
crossings, correct. So that's at grade road rail crossings. So national rail trends, I'm not going to spend too much time on. These are trends that you all are aware of. Some of the big ones, the strike, of course, was averted, yay. And longer trains that we're seeing, freight trains that are getting longer and longer. And of course, the pandemic ridership effects.
Yeah, Emily, can I ask, why wouldn't we spend more time on that? I mean, I think the trends are what a lot of this is about, and that's the Wall Street Journal would sit up there. So again, to synthesize this into an information piece that allows us to go forward and help on policy recommendations, understanding what those trends are as part of this report is pretty important. But we know that coal is in decline, maybe steep decline based on world issues that may peak back up, but ultimately coal will almost completely go away in the next 20 to 30 years. You know, the intermodal is where we're seeing growth. You know that there's congestion in that in particular. It would really help us to understand the commodity flows. You know, grain coming from the west is moving through Commonwealth to ports. Oil is coming through in tank cars from points all over the country. It'd be helpful to understand the national trends and Virginia's place in those national trends. If we're losing something, are we making up ground with an alternative product type? They're pretty limited, as I say, there's 7 or 8 different categories to look at. So I'd like to see that as an emphasized part of this, what's happening.
Sure, and so one of the big stories when it comes to national trends is the supply chain crisis and the fact that we actually picked up business in Virginia through the Port of Virginia and made use of our rail network as a way to pick up business from West Coast ports. And that's something that that I can talk about too. And it's something that I would like to capture in our forward-thinking transforming freight in Virginia initiative. That's something that's not a flash in the pan, as we know. It's something that because Virginia is only climbing to 40% of mode share at the port by rail rather than truck. That's the highest percentage in the country for ports, and it's something that we can use to our advantage. I think it's closer to 34% right now, but the goal is 40%. And as those numbers grow, I think we really solidify our position on the East Coast as a port that can get goods in and out quickly and be more reliable than West Coast ports.
I would make a recommend or a suggestion that I would disagree with that point, because I think the surge of freight through the Hampton roads was a result of congestion at other ports, including Savannah, New York, and Long Beach, California. I think there will be some adjustment. Virginia Ports is a very elastic port in the sense that a lot of our business, 60% close to it, originates outside of or is destined to places outside the Commonwealth, which makes us very vulnerable. The price changes to congestion, we benefited from it, but I can guarantee you a lot of that business is going to go back to its natural port. It's going to bounce.
Because it was most efficient there from the
That's right.
Yeah, they told us that.
This is episode based.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't think we can say we're going to gain market share as a result of the pandemic of congestion.
Yeah, the port people told us that they're projecting a decrease.
Well, it's good that they're saying that, because it's going to happen. If you live in this port long enough, you see those trends.
And the coal traffic will have its impact on that physical infrastructure as well. I mean, all of these things are part of the story. With coal declining, some of the routes that we favor right now that the railroads, CSX and NF, have put tremendous amount of money into maintaining, will start to decline in importance because that won't be the primary intermodal route. So
And that's why we need to get busy. These inland ports are extremely important for the economic development and energy it creates. And the governor spending money to get property, multi-acres, ready for attracting business to come in and develop. That's what's important to the port.
Well, I think one of the things that, that has changed of late is that the Virginia Economic Development Partnership has a site selection task force, and for the first time, we have a seat on that task force. I get a seat at the table, and we
that's a
kind
dumb
of had,
moment for us. Yeah, like really? This
Yeah.
is just now.
we've kind of been towards the end of making those connections. And so being able to, as they're looking at those different sites around the Commonwealth, to be able to weigh in from a rail perspective early, it's been a huge, it's been very impactful for us because, there's times where we say, yes, this will work. And there are times where we need to say, no, this will not work for a rail. And I think that's going to be very valuable in seeing how these big sites get developed and how we maintain our competitiveness to compete for some of these big locations.
So, thanks, Jen. So of course, the ridership story nationwide ridership has gone up, fortunately, but in Virginia, we're surpassing the national trends. That recent article from the Washington Post says that in FY22, the ridership went up to 22.9 riders, and that was up 10.8 million passengers from FY21. So it's up, but still not up to the pre-pandemic levels of records at 32.5 nationwide. And of course, Virginia is doing better than the average nationwide for ridership, as we heard about earlier in the director's report. So that's a positive story of how Virginia is leading the way. A little bit about public rail plan, or public outreach for the statewide rail plan. We started back in May 2021 with the launch of our website. We've done a number of virtual meetings because this was started during pandemic rules for meetings. So we've been successful in getting feedback, fortunately, through those methods. And we actually also included in this process our Commonwealth Corridor public outreach. I reported on that a while back. The Commonwealth Corridor is a study that we did for the General Assembly, looking at the corridor between Hampton Roads to Richmond, Charlottesville, and the New River Valley that came out in 2021. So we've had a virtual public meeting with the draft statewide rail plan at the end of September. And then we had a month-long public comment period for that ended in October. So right now we're in the process of incorporating those comments and finalizing the plan. So what we heard a lot about upgrading the train schedules. So not just about track miles, but also about operations and optimizing that. I think we're in a better position now to be able to do that. Prioritizing rail service investments that to locations with multimodal connections and economic opportunities. Identifying strategies for rail that complement the multimodal freight network and present solutions to known problems. Upgrading technology for at-grade crossings. And of course, we did get a comment that the past freight rail investments to serve the Port of Virginia are paying off. And so we have a summary of those comments and some of the latest comments in the rail plan. As far as our transportation planning goals, we take our overarching goals from VTrans, the long-range transportation plan that's multimodal that comes out of WAPI. These are kind of the bread and butter goals that we hear about for transportation planning across modes economic competitiveness and prosperity, accessible places, safety, proactive system management, and healthy communities, sustainable transportation communities. We look at the data and the trends. So even though those weren't necessarily featured in some of the highlights, we really do dig down into those, into the trends and input and goals to inform our policy framework and recommended projects. And we use these goals to measure the benefits of the rail projects. So, yes, sir.
On your last bullet, you on that helping communities and sustainable transportation, that we were talking about alternative energy source use and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other sustainability.
So when we look at this goal and we compare, we have our project list in chapter 5, and we measure each one of the projects against these goals, and we look at the decreased emissions as a result of our projects. We think that aligns with that goal.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you.
So our rail planning steps in general, data trends, we look at data trends and feedback. We're guided by the V-Trans goals and our agency goals. We recommend projects, and we document the project benefits. So as part of this rail plan, we developed a set of policy framework items. We have them separated into freight and passenger. This is something that we've come to you to talk about in the past when we were developing them. But these are the policy framework items that really rose to the top as we looked at our decision making and how we choose projects. We want to invest in the rail freight network to support rail transportation alternatives that complement the Virginia highway system and create economic opportunities. So that's important to us. We see that it's not that the rail system functions with other modes, and we don't want to lose sight of that. Prioritize the preservation of rail right-of-way for rail transportation use while facilitating proposals for co-located recreational uses as appropriate. And that is really getting to that rails with trails, rails to trails
You actually have
situation. Pardon me?
Do you actually have any co-location applications or plans that you're considering?
We don't have any right now. Right now, the one that the co-located rails with trails example in Virginia is the Capitol Trail, where CSX is elevated, and we have what's called the low line instead of the high line in New York. Richmond has the low line. Yes, sir.
In that bullet, that preservation right of way, I would suggest putting something additional in there, such as the word public or alternative use. Rail right of way is already being used, former rail right of way is already being used in the Commonwealth for water, fiber optics, and it's not just transportation.
So I guess, yes, it should say transportation and utility use. The thing that I guess the worst case scenario is you have a corridor like this that reverts back. It goes out of transportation use, and then all of the previous landowners could possibly have claim to these two different sections, and then you've lost a corridor, whether it be for rail or a road or anything, and including those utilities.
Yeah,
So expanding that.
An example is there are others. They've got some pipeline which comes down the former Norfolk Southern corridor all the way from Central Virginia to Norfolk. It is a major source of water for Eastern Virginia. That's nothing to do with, but I guess you can look at it as transporting water, because that's went through a pipe. But that is a very desirable, seems to be, the use of a former rail corridor that was just sitting there idle otherwise.
Good point. Yes, sir.
I'm still disturbed when we're talking about freight, and we're talking about CSX, and we're talking about Norfolk Southern, and we're doing all these things, and it's just increasing their profit. I don't understand how we can whack up,
And decreasing our costs in theory, and that's
well,
the trade-off.
in theory.
And making it safer. and
I mean,
making
it
our-
drives me crazy that we're subsidizing CSX and all. I just can't get used to that.
I think it's a bargain that we may be forced to make in good conscience, but it's one we should be scrupulous about making certain that we're getting what we expect.
Exactly, not being taken
And
advantage
that's a
of.
very sophisticated comparison when we look at, are we really getting what we expect? One of the things this report should really help us with is trying to understand that. Is this working? I know we have some macro numbers here, but I agree completely. It is an unusual situation, but we subsidize the trucking industry through the use of, through the extensive maintenance and roadway infrastructure we provide, and airlines through the federally and state supported facilities. So we do it elsewhere.
The public is used to
Well, as somebody who moves freight, I find it extremely difficult to deal with the railroads.
that.
I mean, and I think it's because they're a monopoly. I mean, and they said what makes things comfortable for them. And I've had conversations with Jennifer, so I'm uncomfortable with that. I move a lot of freight around Albemarle and other places. I can't call a railroad and book a passage for a container or multiple containers like I can a truck line. They just, by default, freight forwarders and brokers call truck lines to move freight. Unless you work on a multimodal basis with a steamship line, the port has entered into a recent agreement with the railroad to, I guess I could call BPA and book a container to go to the Midwest, Norfolk Southern. But as a freight forwarder who moves 80,000 containers a year or more, I can't call Norfolk Southern and book a container, which, I don't know that that's a area they have to increase staff. Maybe, I don't know what it would do to their infrastructure in terms of employees. But it's very, if we want to get trucks off the road, a different system needs to be brokered with the railroads, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and other railroads, to make it easier to call them and move freight on their system. That's my point. And to that point, with making you uncomfortable, I think with the kind of money we give, we have a little leverage, I would think.
I would just suggest, respecting your point, that the model of modern railroading has changed, and the one-offs are no longer economical.
I understand.
And so, the emphasis, of course, is on commodities, and you consider containers from the port a commodity, I guess, in that regard. But they're moving bulk commodities that don't do well on highways generally, with the exception of the intermodal business.
Right.
So I hear your point. I think we need to understand, though, that the models of the railroads have changed. I mean, if we're seeking that type of service, we're not going to succeed. They cannot work under that paradigm anymore.
Sure, I understand.
So again, helping us understand those trends is something that kind of puts us all on a common footing.
I'm just suggesting if we're interested in getting trucks off the road, an easier working relationship with the railroad, somehow, some system where we can encourage people to participate, to move product by rail. Because a lot of I'll just use you have to move 300 miles on rail and make it cost effective and time effective for my customers. So the Midwest probably carries 35% of Virginia's freight, I would say. Somewhere in that, most of that rail that's moving out of the port is going to the Midwest. And more can move if it was an easier relationship or an easier method of working with the railroads. But I know there's a lot of challenges with that. They have to change their system. And I mean, I've worked with them, and you have a container sitting at their depot, and if you don't come and get it, well, they start charging you $200 a day for the first couple of days, and it goes to $400, and then end up paying $1,000 a day to have a container sitting at their rail yard if you can't get it off. So
Those are important points. And I do want to address the comment about our grants to freight railroads, the benefits that the state gets from those, and our programs specifically, so our freight grant programs. The rail plan does go through some of the highlights of the grant programs and the guidance that we have, some of the measures that we have for approving grant applications and our process for that. But we are planning to do a real deep dive into our freight programs and present some of that to the Commonwealth Transportation Board once this rail plan is finalized. So the rail plan is pretty comprehensive. It deals with a lot of topics, as you're seeing today. I'm not an expert on every single one of those topics, but it does the reporting that allows us to make comparisons. But we also want to be doing some deep dives into these topics that are most important to Virginia, that go above and beyond what the FRA requires.
So let me put a finer point on what Emily just said. The next step for us with the board after we get through the rail plan is to look at our policies for how we allocate funding and bring new projects, whether it's for the freight program, whether it's for the short line program, or the rail industrial access. So that's our next. These are like the big picture framework. Now we want to go back and look at our CTB policies and say, are we living up to the framework that we've established in the rail plan, and how can we then support it through our investments? And so that will start once we finish the rail plan, and we'll work through that process with
I suggest we want to make sure that the allocations are as they should be with
Correct.
us as well.
Yes.
I'd like to lead in where Scott is going to my observation. Seems to me that this earlier comment about what the trends are, seems that your expectation and desire to be able to collect freight is inconsistent with the business model.
It's different, perhaps. I don't know if it's inconsistent, but we've got to focus on what they want to move and what they're equipped to move.
They're going to maximize profits. That's
Well, of course, because they're private
Shareholders.
shareholders, right? But they're also not equipped to handle the one-offs that they work through most of
Well,
the history.
I would suggest they move a lot of containers. Because, I mean, we double stacked in all the money spent to raise the height of the tunnels between here and the Midwest was significant.
Supported that.
And so, that was a public investment to help them make more money. So there ought to be some kind of meeting in the middle. Coal will never move by truck. Grain rarely moves by truck. It moves by rail. So regardless of what happens, the railroad's always going to get their share of that. It's the commercial part of it, the shipping containers, that really make it more tricky.
Along those lines, and not to go into detail on this today, whenever I go out and speak to a civic group, what I'll let others understand this situation. What was open questions, one question almost invariably get is, why isn't the state doing more to encourage intermodal traffic, to get traffic off of I-95 and I-81, which both of which have parallel railroads within 1 to 10 miles of them, almost all the way through the Commonwealth. And there's a group out in the Roanoke Valley that's giving me a fit about that. And, one response to that, well, if that's such a great idea, it would already be happening. Okay. Another response to that is the Commonwealth has not really embraced that kind of project in its rail plan or elsewhere. Now, can it? I don't know. But I think we really need to look at that opportunity to divert traffic off of the interstates, particularly. When the rail is right there, man, it's going to need some upgrading, I suspect, that they certainly claim it does. But we do have that opportunity. And I don't really see it in the plan, but even look at it. Just a thought.
So, go ahead.
Just really quick. From a time check perspective, we have about a half an hour because we do have a hard stop at 11. There's another committee that meets, and then they have to set up for lunch in here. So I know you've got, and we have one person signed up for public comment. So got maybe 30 minutes to get through the rest of the deck.
Sorry.
No, this is really helpful, and I hate to be the one that's got to be the timekeeper.
But this is the important point.
It is.
And,
It is.
you know, to Ray's point, the railroads aren't doing that because it's not the best allocation of their capital. And it may serve our needs, but it doesn't serve theirs. So if we're really serious about this, public-private partnerships, where we step in and actually partner with them and provide the capital to give them a differentiated business model that makes
Well, let's
sense.
get a bang for our buck. That's all.
Well,
Yeah,
of course.
exactly. Let's get some.
So
But that's the big idea, to Ray's point, that's kind of lacking in our plan. And we've talked about additional inland ports, we've talked about capacity upgrades, or doing things that create that 300-mile line haul. You know, they're big items that we'll need in combination of public and private capital to accomplish.
And I am open to suggestions on those sorts of things. I mean, that is the holy grail, right? To be able to effectively divert traffic. We did it historically through our grants to CSX and Norfolk Southern, our partnerships with them for double stack over many years. Now that the National Gateway is complete and Norfolk Southern's double stack projects, what's the next big thing is really separating passenger and freight. We're working on that. So intermodal facilities, the study that's going on with VDP in the port is another opportunity. But having, but looking at the best opportunities for diverting freight to rail is something that we'd like to do, and we'd like to be able to do it efficiently and deliver benefits to the state. It's a tough nut to crack. So I don't have all of the answers in the plan. It's something that we're constantly looking at. I'm turning over to passengers so that we can stay on time. Let's see, this is not going forward. Oh, come on. Are you able to do it on the computer by any chance?
No.
Oh, goodness.
Right.
There we go. All right, so policy framework stations. We are taking a step back on our policy framework for stations compared to the 2018 rail plan. The 2018 rail plan had some specifics on station development and funding. Now that we have the split with Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and DRPT's the framework is more general. And we want to open up opportunities and not hem VPRA in as they work on station development throughout the state and prioritization. So we still want to make sure that station decisions consider multimodal connections. We want to make sure that our improvement priorities, the very top priority is to make sure that the stations that exist are ADA compatible, that they are maintaining a state of good repair, and that we're partnering with stakeholders to fund capacity improvements as service increases. And then some other priorities as we go down the list, new stations and also customer improvements that contribute to customer experience. But the number one priority is making sure that stations are ADA compatible and in a state of good repair.
So if I can just jump in for
Sure.
a second. The board has an existing station stop policy that is very restrictive. It's very prescriptive of what the Commonwealth will fund. What we want to do is to get away from that very prescriptive policy that, quite frankly, doesn't enable communities that are working on new stations and new areas of service to compete for things like smart scale. It precludes them from doing that. So we want to rescind that board policy, replace it with this policy framework, and the passenger rail funding for the Commonwealth flows through DRPT to the Passenger Rail Authority. This will set some broad parameters, but then ultimately it's VPRA is the implementing agency and their board, which this has also been presented to their board as well. It is their responsibility to work kind of boots on the ground with those communities on those station improvements and leverage funding and assets. DRPT is available to support that as well, but really trying to pull back from being very prescriptive, set this high level aspirational framework reinstate the ability to seek smart scale where it makes sense and really let BPRA do their job working with the communities to get the stations either upgraded or in the case of new stations, constructed where those services are going in.
And we need to not convey the appearance or the reality to passenger rail users that they are second-class citizens. Where would you go to get on an airplane and they told you, well, go stand in a little hut out the other side of the runway and one will stop and pick you up? It's not the way we treat air travelers. We treat passenger rail travelers in certain places poorly, because it is go out and stand, like Ashland as an example. Go out and stand in the rain.
Ashland's my stop.
I know. And in Roanoke, I had dinner with the mayor of Roanoke Thursday night. And I said, Mr. Mayor, you're giving a second-class impression of this city. There is no station. There's a shelter, a covered platform. But, you know, when the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour and it's 25 degrees and somebody's out there not the best of health anyway, that's second-class stuff.
Just look at Union Station in DC.
Yeah. We need to keep that in mind as we look at these facilities and not make rail travelers second-class citizens.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned talking to the mayor of Roanoke. I mean, I do think this is a partnership, and with that particular station, the Commonwealth's position was to get the service there, get the platform built, and the locality was the station. I think that's where we need to make sure to the final statement on the slide is working together in partnership to figure out how to make it happen and not kind of throw, it's your responsibility or my responsibility. No, we need to work together. And that's what this is intended to do in a way that we haven't articulated.
Part of the state building a platform shouldn't, at that point in time, there'd be a conversation with the mayors and local officials and say, this is collaboration, this is a true partnership is a give and take.
I don't want to go back, there's history in some of these situations, but you know, those conversations have happened and the Commonwealth has followed through with their portion. I think what's happening now with the New River Valley, with an authority set up to do the passenger rail station there, and the conversation that BPRA is having continually with the authority is helping foster that partnership. So it's not just, I'm going to do this, you go figure out that. We are working together. But I mean, these are significant investments and there's a community role in that as well.
Well, as long as it takes to get a station set up, it seems like it would give the local communities time to gather the resources necessary to build a proper station.
And I think with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we have new opportunities for federal funding that we have not had in the past. And I think that to the extent that we can, and I will say we DRPT and we VPRA can partner with communities like the New River Valley Station Authority to help go after that money, to help others go after that money. It doesn't just have to be the state, it can be the authority, the passenger rail, the station authority can apply for funding. We got great talented staff and consultant partners that can help from a technical perspective to put together applications and to support those communities in pursuing that money to do those stations. And that's something that didn't exist when Roanoke, when the Roanoke discussions happened, but we have that now and we need to be aggressive in going after that.
It's only going to affect ridership.
I completely agree.
So that funding partnership line item here really gets to what Jen's talking about and allowing for some flexibility on how stations are funded and going in with our partners to get some of the federal money that's out there. So this is really the meat of the rail plan, our projects, and these are featured in chapters 3 through 5 of the rail plan. By the numbers, we have 262 total rail projects in the plan, 6.4 billion in total planned investment. The short-term investments are planned within the next 6 years, so there's our 6-year improvement program, and long-term investments are planned beyond 6 years. Now, some of those long-term investments that we have listed, we've listed some projects that we don't necessarily have cost estimates for. So there are some long-term projects that aren't reflected in the dollar amounts. One thing I will point out, this is the first time we've separated out the rail crossings. We haven't had this robust rail crossings category before because we haven't had a federal program through the Federal Railroad Administration before. It was really the sole crossings program was through FHWA, the Section 130 program. But now we're working with FRA more closely on crossings, and we've applied for a few that I'll talk about in a second. So we did have some changes in cost estimates from our original draft to what we plan to put out for the final. So we have some refinements in cost estimates. We expect that those are going to continue to be refined as we go forward and as VTRA and our other partners have future cost updates. But we did add some of the cost estimates for additional Western Rail Corridor projects, some of the projects associated with our comprehensive rail agreement with CSX. So we were able to put a finer point on some of those costs, and that resulted in higher estimates for the final plan. So,
What's the major driver of that difference? Right. $5 million versus $5.7 million.
So our rail programs are really set up, they're application based. So we have 3 different freight rail programs: the rail preservation program that's geared toward short line railroads, the rail industrial access program for economic development projects, and then our freight program, which is also application based, and those are for larger freight programs that have benefits for the state. And so we are, those are, as I mentioned, those are application based. But the passenger rail program is on transforming rail in Virginia. And so the passenger rail program, even though it's geared toward passenger rail, it's about separating passenger and freight and optimizing passenger and freight operations, both on the eastern corridor and the western corridor. And so you could argue that some of the investments that we have in transforming rail in Virginia and on the passenger side really benefit both passenger and freight.
I understand it. I'm just struck about the magnitude of the difference. 123 projects, we have $1 billion, 72 projects, almost $7 billion.
A lot of it has to do with the budget that we have for the programs.
So let me just answer this. Commonwealth Rail Fund, by code, 93% of it goes to passenger rail, 7% goes to freight rail. That's your difference. And
This is all state money.
This is a combination.
Yes, combination. But you've got big projects like Long Bridge. Keep in mind, transforming rail in Virginia is $3.7 billion. There are big numbers that go into those passenger rail projects. Small number of projects, very impactful. We've got mega projects on the passenger rail side. 93% of the Commonwealth Rail Fund goes.
That's like that.
Yes. So that to me totally explains.
Long Bridge must be good.
Long Bridge is definitely good.
So I do want to touch on passenger rail corridor development. The corridors in Virginia are outlined here. We've defined them pretty broadly. Western corridor is defined broadly as DC down to Bristol and beyond. The Commonwealth corridor is the east-west corridor that we studied as part of the rail plan at the request of the General Assembly. Eastern corridor is what you see here in blue, and there are some overlaps with the Commonwealth corridor. And this slide is meant to show how these different corridors are in different stages of development. We are working with FRA through its corridor identification development program, the CID program, which was just unveiled in May of 2022. We have 3 expressions of interest out to FRA right now for each one of these corridors so that we can work with them to develop the corridors step by step in a logical way. Yes.
Both those lines end up at the Long Bridge, is that correct?
Yes, 2 of them do.
And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why When is that even scheduled to be looked at? Much less
Longbridge?
constructed? Yeah.
Longbridge will be is funded and will be advertised in a couple of packages in 2023. Now,
Sounds right.
yes, for design builds. I mean, that is very much underway. Now, keep in mind, those projects don't come back to this board. Those projects are overseen and managed by the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority Board, which I chair, and Mr. McLaughlin back there is going to make magic happen to deliver those projects. But those projects are most definitely moving forward and moving forward very aggressively. We've got out on the street right now, we've got a opportunity for teams to express intent to compete for Longbridge. It's not a situation where if they don't express interest now that they're precluded, but it's to give us a gauge of what's the industry's response. These are very big, very aggressive projects, but in terms of.
So transforming freight in Virginia is really what we want to dig our teeth into when this rail plan is over. We have some concepts that are in the current rail plan. Of course, we've laid out our program for freight rail that's in the 6-year improvement program. We are very interested in hearing the outcome of this intermodal facility study that's coming through from VEDP and the port, and we've been a partner with them on that. But we do want to be developing, this is a work in progress, a bold plan that identifies technology, equipment, and infrastructure enhancements to maximize the capacity and efficiency of Virginia's transportation network. And increasing the percentage of goods moving in and out of the Port of Virginia by rail is something that we'd like to focus on. And linking our freight projects to that goal is something that we're looking at in particular. And of course, looking at the data at where rail is within the state, because most of that freight, of course, is going outside of the state, from the port to outside of the state and vice versa, but also looking at opportunities within the state of Virginia for where those clusters of industries are located. That's what this map highlights here, and how we can promote rail freight within the state as well. Yes.
Just so I'm clear on what we're saying there. Are we saying that we have a bold plan that identifies, or that this is the initiation of a requirement that we develop it? I'm not sure what that.
This is a work in progress.
So we have a plan.
We are working on this bold plan that, and we wanted to put some more into this, some more specifics into transforming freight in Virginia. We'd like to have something that's just as meaningful as transforming the passenger rail in Virginia. As I mentioned before, we don't have all the answers just yet, but this is a focus that is going to come, that we're going to be working on more as the rail plan concludes, and also opening up more of looking at some of the get past data and how our programs have gotten us to benefits in the past, and how we can build on that.
Just make sure, however we introduce it, it's clear what we're actually saying.
Okay.
That we're going to develop a bold plan.
I know this is, slide's very interesting. We're focusing on rail, but is your department involved at all with the barge service, something that Deep River Terminal, Richmond?
No, we're not. That's the Richmond TPO and the port work together.
But when there are opportunities,
That would be an important collaboration. It's not effective cost-wise, operationally, to move containers to Richmond for long, unless there's a manufacturing rail siding or some sort.
And that's some of the conversation we've had with the port, is where does it make sense, back to the conversation that we had earlier about distance. And you've got to have, even for inland ports and intermodal facilities, you've got to have a clientele and a base that is looking for that kind of connection. And I think that's, those are the conversations we're having with the port. Those things are going to take time to work through what makes sense, not only for railroads and the port but for private industry, and so that it's not a build build it and they will come, but it's built to generate that kind of economic activity. And I think that's something that we're continuing to explore with the port and the beach.
So this additional category that we're looking at in projects is rail crossing projects. We did put in some applications for crossing projects in through the FRA's program that called the Rail Crossing Elimination Program. Now that doesn't mean that those are necessarily going to be closed. It also funds upgrades. So that is something that we're pursuing right now, and I'm just going to go quickly. So we do have all of our projects on this interactive story map. I don't think we have time for a demo, but you all are welcome to take a look at what we have on our BPRA projects landing page and the PRE projects landing page, and we also have the freight rail projects mapped out in addition to that.
And we'll get you a link to that so that you can get in there and play with it and let us know. We're happy to do kind of one-on-one sessions with any of you to talk through that interactive rail plan and any of the elements.
And just this is our getting started on transforming freight in Virginia. Port of Virginia support. These are some of the projects that are in the plan right now to support the Port of Virginia. Close to $50 million through the freight grant program is committed right now for the Central Yard expansion at NIT, the Commonwealth Railway Marshalling Yard, and Virginia Inland Port inside the gate investments. So you mentioned a lot of folks have asked about benefits and why we're doing this. This is really an explanation of our benefit cost analysis. We took all of the projects that are in the plan and ran them through a benefit cost analysis to show savings for diverting freight and passengers from highways to rail, and also safety benefits, congestion benefits, and air quality benefits.
Virginia and Port, is that with Richmond and Baltimore? Investments in Virginia and Port.
When we say Virginia Inland Port, we're talking about the Front Royal Port.
Just from another one of Richmond.
Right. So that's the end of the bulk of my slides. We can talk about how to use this plan another time. Yeah.
So we'll follow up with you and get you the link to the story map and the GIS information that Bridget demonstrated. Get to that, and then we're happy to kind of walk you through that.
And when is this process to conclude?
So we are, I would say, early next year, we are looking to wrap this up. So
We'll bring back
we will bring you back a final briefing in the rail committee, and I would say, because I'm trying to work through how best to run that moving forward. Because we want to make it more of a living document, and it's a very interactive online document. It makes it a little hard to get, from a board perspective. So anyway, we've got a few things to work through, but we'll come back to you early next year.
And the numbers that we have here are the numbers that we intend for the final plan. So those are staying the way they are.
So before we wrap up, we do have one person that signed up for public comment, Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you.
Just a closing comment for Emily. Yeah, and the other thing that I think should be included, we've talked about this before, is just the section on technology that's affecting the rail industry. It's changing it dramatically, it's improving it, it's making it different than it was. I think we need to identify that as one of the sections that implications.
We also track what's going on with the state of passenger rail getting access to the freight rail. So I've been reading that. That'll run in South Texas and Louisiana.
That's a good story. Was there a decision on that they have to provide access? Yeah, decision has come down.
All right, so we do provide an opportunity for public comment. Mr. Whitfield, 3 minutes. We can't.
Okay,
we
Ron
really
Whitfield, Fairfax
just
County
want to
Tax
receive
Credit.
your feedback.
Basically, thank you for this presentation. Yesterday, I was at Northern Gear Transportation Committee's legislative meeting in Newington. And I explained that I had first been to Springfield in 1979 when Joe Alexander was the funding for the Blue Line extension. Here we are, whatever that is, 40 years later, 43 years later, and I've had no progress at all from DRPT. I first asked Jennifer Mitchell about this in January 2018, including an Amtrak station in Springfield. Now, if you look on a map where Springfield is at the intersection of I-495 and I-95, and I suggested her the long-range interstate bus transfer center adjacent to an expanded station. Rich Dalton of VRE told me last Thursday night that there's room to put an Amtrak station. Mr. Brewer yesterday responded, well, we can't add more stations. And I'm saying, I live in Fairfax County with 1.15 million people for whom access to Amtrak at present is only in DC and Alexandria and Oliver. So I will be making a formal request, maybe as early as today, that be included in your plan, that the funds be included, if necessary, with joint venture partnership with whoever. And after that meeting yesterday, I happened to deliver a vehicle to a finance executive at Bechtel. And the other comment I made was the need for what's called the Roslyn bypass. And for 10 years, WMATA, basically because of Arlington and Alexandria, have prevented what is a logical step of providing expanded ridership for connecting the Silver and Orange line to the Blue Line, Dulles Airport to Reagan, Amazon HQ2. And as I said yesterday, I've had no response from WMATA since I asked them in November 2018. So I haven't got time to write all this, but please come and ask me questions because I've been involved in transportation issues. I've lived in Fairfax County for 45 years. And unfortunately, I've had virtually no communication from anybody in either DR, well, certainly not from DRPT, and only Richard Cummings, I guess, Secretary of Finance. So the problem with the TRV plan is it's relying on $700 to $900 million in tolls on I-66. There has not been one word in the press because they just raised the tolls and the HOV2 converted to HOV3. So yes, I support expanding rail in Virginia, but it has to be done in a fair financial process. Steve Pittard, I've known for better 10 years, and he refused at the governor's conference to say why they haven't considered alternatives to using the I-66 toll funding. I'm all ears, and so please understand if I'm not given any answers from you all, I will talk to the governor. And I actually have talked to the governor 3 times in the last 6 months. And so I will talk to him as early as next week. Thank you.
Thank you.